Heather had never thought that an ordinary dinner party with friends could completely change her life. It was a chilly evening in Vancouver, where she gathered with her close friends who had just moved to the city for dinner. The soothing music and soft lighting created a cozy atmosphere. But inside Heather, there was a strange feeling, as if something was wrong with her body. It all started when Heather noticed she was having trouble breathing. At first, she thought it might be due to the stuffy air inside, or perhaps she had overeaten. But the feeling didn't stop there. It gradually worsened. A heavy sensation pressed on her chest, as if an invisible weight was crushing her. She couldn't understand what was happening to her. Maybe I suddenly got sick, she thought. But her anxiety grew as her breathing became more labored. Trying to stay calm, Heather stood up from the dining table and walked into the bathroom. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her face, now pale. Sweat dripped down the sides of her temples, and her heartbeat raced erratically. "Heather, if you don't call for help, you're going to die here," a voice echoed in her mind. It wasn't a vague fear, but a clear awareness that life and death were near. She didn't know how to describe it, but it was an undeniable feeling. Hurriedly leaving the bathroom, Heather returned to the living room, where her friends were still chatting happily, unaware of what was happening. She took a deep breath and shouted in desperation, "I need an ambulance, right now!" The room fell silent, and everyone's eyes turned to her in surprise and concern. Her boyfriend, sitting in the corner, immediately stood up and came over, trying to calm her down. "It's okay, I'll take you to the hospital," he said, but Heather shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, I need an ambulance, right now." She knew she didn't have much time left, but instead of calling for an ambulance, her boyfriend decided to take her to the hospital in the car. As they drove, Heather sat in the car, staring at the pitch-black road ahead. The highway twisted through the hills, and the darkness enveloped them like a black curtain with no way out. Inside her, an indescribable feeling began to spread, stronger than ever. She felt like she was going to die. As the car sped down the road, Heather felt a strange urge rising within her. As if she was no longer afraid of death. She realized that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't change what was happening. All resistance now seemed meaningless. And then, she decided to surrender. At that moment, a strange peace took over Heather's mind. She was no longer afraid, no longer anxious, just a serene feeling. Is this how it all ends? She silently wondered. But before Heather could fully understand, a thick darkness began to engulf her. It didn't come suddenly, but slowly, gently, like a black velvet curtain gradually being drawn from behind. The last light she could see shrank until it was just a small dot, like the head of a pin. Then finally that dot also disappeared. Now Heather was completely submerged in darkness. It wasn't the kind of darkness one sees when closing their eyes. This was an infinite void, a deep darkness with no beginning, no end. There was no up, no down, no left, no right. Heather floated in that dense black space, as if she were in an invisible lake but without water. There was no sound, no noise, only absolute silence. Even in that vast darkness, Heather didn't feel fear. On the contrary, she felt herself being lifted, cradled in a strange sense of peace. There was no tension, no anxiety. Everything was completely quiet and still. She began to wonder, where is this? Is this death? Curiosity began to take over Heather's mind, as if she were exploring a new world, one she had never known before. Heather raised her hand in front of her, trying to see if she could spot it in this darkness. But all she saw was blackness. There was no sign of her body, no light to reveal anything. This is so strange, she thought. But instead of feeling afraid, she was oddly drawn to the experience. Suddenly, in the distance, Heather saw a tiny speck of light. It was the only thing she could see in the vast darkness. The light was very small but emitted a faint glow, and then it began to grow, getting larger, as if it was moving closer to her. Heather could do nothing but stand still and watch. She couldn't move, couldn't run. All she could do was wait and see what would happen. The light grew larger, clearer, and as it came closer, Heather realized it wasn't just an ordinary speck of light. It looked like a tunnel, with spiraling streams of light swirling around, blending shades of white, blue, and silver. Tiny sparks flickered from the tunnel, like electric sparks. Heather felt as if she was being pulled upward, as though she was drifting toward the light without any control. She tried to reach out, to grab onto something to stop herself, but it was useless. "I don't want to lose control," she thought in panic. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop. She continued to float upward, getting closer and closer to the powerful light ahead. As she drew nearer, a feeling of anxiety and fear began to flood Heather's mind. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know what awaited her at the end of the tunnel. Everything was completely foreign and beyond her understanding. But one thing was certain: she couldn't stop. Heather continued to be pulled in, on a journey with no escape. Heather was swept into the swirling light, unable to control her body. The feeling of being both absent and present overwhelmed her. As she drew closer to the brilliant light, a wave of anxiety overtook her mind. She struggled to regain control, but all efforts were futile. Finally, as if pulled from a dark world, she suddenly appeared in a completely different space. In front of Heather, the radiant light was no longer an abstract beam, but expanded into an infinite space. The light was white, blue, and silver, but these were not ordinary colors. There was a strange depth within them, as if each color contained countless layers of meaning that she couldn't comprehend. Heather marveled at the brilliance of the light, yet at the same time she felt a powerful presence, some kind of force hidden within it. Then, from within the light, Heather began to see shapes emerging. At first, they were only blurry shadows, but gradually they became clearer. Heather felt as though she were attending a football match under strong lights. Except this time, the people weren't players on the field, but souls from the afterlife. These individuals emerged from the light as if stepping out of it one by one, like a large crowd. Heather stood still, stunned by the scene before her. She didn't understand what was happening, and fear began to take hold. She wondered where she was and who these souls were. They walked toward her. Hundreds of them, maybe more, but Heather couldn't recognize any of them. Then, amidst the crowd, a familiar face appeared. It was her great-grandmother, a woman who had passed away long ago, someone Heather remembered fondly from her childhood. Behind her great-grandmother was her great-grandfather, followed by Aunt Alice, Uncle Dick, and other relatives Heather had lost long ago. Each face, each gaze brought back memories of the past, of people who had left the earthly world. Heather couldn't believe her eyes. She didn't know if this was real or just a strange dream. In a panic, she shouted at the crowd, her voice echoing through the space, but no one responded. She backed away, raising her hands as if to push the familiar figures away. "Stay back! Stay back!" Heather yelled. "I don't understand what's happening." Her great-grandmother, with a calm and gentle demeanor, stepped forward. Heather couldn't hold back her tears upon seeing her, but she still didn't understand why her great-grandmother was there, or why these people had appeared in this strange space. "You have died, Heather," her great-grandmother gently said, her eyes glowing softly in the surrounding light. "You have died." The words struck Heather's mind like a hard blow to reality. She had died? This couldn't be true. She was too young, she had too much left undone. She couldn't accept this truth. "No, it can't be," Heather cried out in anguish. "I haven't even lived, I haven't done anything yet." Heather collapsed, her legs no longer able to support her. She bowed her head, sobbing uncontrollably, unable to accept that her life had ended. She didn't want to die. She wasn't ready to die. She still had a whole future ahead of her, and she hadn't even truly begun her journey. A deep sense of regret and sorrow filled her. All the dreams she had, all the plans she had made, vanished like bubbles. As Heather was consumed by grief and despair, she felt the presence of another energy. It was a stronger force, a higher energy compared to the souls she had just encountered. This feeling didn't resemble the presence of a human. It was a different form of existence, higher and more powerful. She couldn't see it, but she could clearly sense its presence around her. This energy made Heather feel as though she were being cradled, protected, and comforted. It didn't speak, but she could understand its message. You will be all right. You have died, but you will be all right. This presence brought her a sense of peace, a relief unlike anything she had ever experienced in her life. With this energy surrounding her, Heather began to be taken through a process of reviewing her life. Every memory, every moment of her life appeared vividly before her eyes. She didn't just see what she had done, but also felt how each of her actions had affected those around her. Heather realized that every thought, word, and action she had taken had an impact on others, whether positive or negative. She could feel the pain she had unintentionally caused others, as well as the joy she had brought to those she had helped. In these memories, Heather realized that her life wasn't meaningless. She had experienced beautiful moments, meaningful relationships, and had done more good than she had ever thought. But at the same time, she also saw the mistakes she had made, the hurt she had inadvertently caused to her loved ones. The energy continued to envelop Heather, helping her understand that death wasn't the end she had once thought. She realized that all the souls around her, including her great-grandmother, great-grandfather, and other relatives, had crossed the boundary between life and death, yet they still existed in another form. They hadn't disappeared. They had just moved into a different state of being, and so had she. Heather felt more at ease as she realized she wasn't alone. Even though death had brought a separation from the physical world, the connections between souls remained. She could still feel the love and warmth of her loved ones, and that made her less afraid. As Heather stood before the radiant light and felt the comfort of the invisible energy surrounding her, she gradually entered a new phase of her journey. The fear and panic from before had faded, replaced by a sense of curiosity mixed with apprehension about what was to come. She didn't know what she would have to face next, but she sensed that this would be an important part of seeking answers to her questions about life and death. A strange feeling began to envelop Heather, as if she was no longer standing on a physical platform, but being submerged in an infinite space. Then, images from her life started to appear, not like a film playing on a screen, but as moments she was reliving directly, vividly and realistically. Heather didn't just see what she had done. She also felt all the emotions, thoughts, and consequences of those actions. The first memories that appeared were from her childhood. She saw herself as a carefree child running around the small garden in front of her house, hearing her mother's joyful laughter as she threw a ball into the flower bed. A sense of love, warmth, and safety filled Heather's soul. She recalled those innocent days when everything in life was simple and peaceful. But it didn't stop there. She could also feel the deep affection her mother had for her throughout those years, the boundless love of a mother who always wanted the best for her child. Heather didn't just relive the beautiful moments of her life. She was also brought back to painful and regrettable ones. She saw herself as a teenager during an argument with her best friend. She clearly remembered the bitter words she had spoken in anger, words that she hadn't thought would deeply hurt her friend. But now, standing in that moment once again, she could feel the pain her friend had endured. Every emotion was clear and real. The sorrow, the sadness, and the sense of betrayal. Heather realized that throughout her life, she hadn't fully understood how each of her actions affected others. The careless words, the small gestures that she once thought were insignificant, now stood out with all their power. She felt regret when she realized how much pain she had caused the people she loved. But at the same time, she also recognized that she wasn't the only one responsible for what had happened. It was an interaction between souls, where everyone impacted one another in ways they didn't even realize. In this stream of memories, Heather also saw moments when she had helped others, sometimes unintentionally, but had brought about positive changes in their lives. She remembered a time when she had spoken with an old-school friend she hadn't seen in years. At that time, her friend was struggling in life and felt lost. Heather had no idea that the simple words of comfort she had spoken that day would help her friend regain faith in life. Now, she could clearly see how her friend had held on to her advice as part of herself, and how it had helped her friend overcome that difficult period. She also recalled other relationships, from family to friends, and even the pets she had once cared for. All of these relationships came into sharp focus in her mind. Each relationship was an exchange of energy, not just on a physical level, but also on a spiritual and emotional one. Heather realized that each person's life is intricately intertwined with others in ways no one can fully comprehend. Everyone is connected, and even the smallest actions can have far-reaching effects, much greater than we can imagine. One of Heather's most memorable moments during this life review was her memories of her parents. She recalled her childhood, the days spent with them, and realized that the conflicts and disagreements within the family weren't merely random events. She felt a deep connection between her soul and her parents, as if they had made an agreement with one another before she came into this world. They weren't just the people who gave birth to and raised her. They were souls who had agreed to accompany her on this journey. Heather understood that everything in her life had its reason. The mistakes she had made, the lessons she had learned, were all part of a larger plan. A plan she couldn't see from the perspective of the physical world. She began to understand the concept of karma, that actions and their consequences are not confined to a single lifetime, but stretch across many lifetimes. During her life review, Heather was also shown some of her past lives. In one of them, she had caused great pain to others, even killing someone. She saw clearly that in her current life, she and that person had switched roles. The one she had once hurt had now become the one causing her suffering. This helped her understand that the connections between souls aren't limited to one lifetime, but extend across many different lives. Heather was also shown how the human body operates on an energetic level. She saw that every emotion, every thought, creates waves of energy within the body, and that this energy not only affects physical health but also impacts the mind and spirit. She learned that unprocessed emotions accumulate in the body, causing illness and pain. However, on the other hand, if one knows how to cleanse and transform energy, they can heal themselves and others. After completing the life review, Heather felt as though she had gained a much deeper understanding of herself and life. However, there was still a lingering sense that something greater awaited her. This feeling grew clearer as she continued to be guided by the powerful energy, leading her toward a new experience, a glimpse into the future of humanity. Heather began to see images of both the present and future world. She could clearly see the destruction that humanity had brought upon itself. Wars, natural disasters, and endless conflicts between nations and ethnic groups. These images played out continuously, like a film of dark events in human history. She witnessed large fires, floods sweeping away everything in their path, and bloody wars. The scenes filled Heather with pain and horror. She also saw the anger, rage, and despair of humanity. Protests, cries for justice, and internal wars sparked by inequality. She felt the pain of every soul as they fought to be heard, to protect what they believed was right. Starving children, people left homeless due to natural disasters and wars. All these images appeared before her eyes, causing her heart to ache. Heather felt overwhelmed by what she was witnessing. She wanted it to stop, unable to bear the brutality of these future visions. Finally, she begged the energy surrounding her to stop, as she could no longer endure it. But the most terrifying realization was that everything Heather saw was the result of human actions. Wars, destruction, disasters, all stemmed from ignorance, from divisions between races, religions, and cultures. In her pain and despair, Heather realized that humanity was standing at a crossroads. If they continued on their current path, the future would be one of endless wars and suffering. But she also recognized that there was hope, that if people could learn to unite, to let go of prejudices and misunderstandings about one another, a brighter future could emerge. After witnessing this future, Heather was asked an important question. Do you want to return? She realized that returning to the world of the living would not be easy. She would have to face great challenges, both physical and mental. Life after returning would be far from simple, and the wounds from this near-death experience might follow her for the rest of her days. Despite this, Heather decided to return. She felt that she still had a mission to fulfill, that there were things left undone in her life. She believed that with her newfound understanding of life and humanity, she could help change the world for the better. She believed that everyone had the ability to create change, and she wanted to use her life to do just that. In the moment of decision, Heather felt herself being enveloped by a powerful energy. She sensed the acceptance and support of the souls she had encountered. And then, a blinding light appeared, pulling her back into the real world. Her breath slowly returned. Her heart began to beat once more in her chest. Heather had come back. But from that moment on, her life would never be the same.